Arthur Jordan, co-founder and CEO of Zeal. We are in the microbial decontamination space. We're a California-based company and with operations in North America, Europe, and South America.
Kim Riel, I'm CEO of Benzinga, and we are a business-to-business provider of advanced formulations. So we do infusions for any edible beverage or any edible or beverage for any cannabinoid in any market.
Hi, good afternoon. Kevin Brooks with Conception Nurseries. We are a tissue culture micropropagation company. We specialize in sourcing elite genetics and bringing them to life in large-scale commercial cultivation facilities.
Gary Santos, CEO of RX Green Technologies. We provide custom substrates and nutrients. We have a cocoa manufacturing facility in Colorado and also have liquid and dry nutrients and additives for your grows.
Awesome, thank you guys so much. And Build My SOP is a standard operating procedure management system. We offer cannabis-specific standard operating procedure templates that you guys can take and customize yourself, or you can hire us to do that customization for you, make sure everything is compliant, and that's kind of what we do at Build My SOP. I want to start off about talking about perspective. So our experience leads us to our perspective in life, right? Obviously, someone's perspective in a cultivation facility is going to be different than somebody's perspective in a manufacturing facility when it comes to what they focus on in quality. And I think all of our different perspectives are going to give us different definitions of quality. And so I'm going to go ahead and pass it around the microphone. And I'd love you guys all to let me know from your life experience, your perspective, and your space in the industry, what is your definition of quality?
I come out of the pharmaceutical R&D world. I was country manager of AstraZeneca. And there, that world is very much driven by GMP as the ultimate arbiter of quality. Can you engage in processes that give a repeatable, predictable result every time? And I've just returned from a 3-week business trip in Europe. I happened to be there when the German law landed on April 1st. And yes, it's very exciting what's happening in Germany, but make no mistake about it, it is a medical-built market driven by GMP as the arbiter of quality in that market.
Yeah, I would add to that. Quality systems are critical in the industry. CGMP, EU GMP, and ISO 9000, et cetera. But fundamentally, we are putting medicine and intoxicants in people's bodies. So everything we do has to be driven by quality so that our consumers have a safe, predictable experience.
That was one of the things that actually kept me away from edibles for a while before everyone got it together, because I would be hit really hard and I would have shit to do. And yeah, so I kept to smoking, but now that I have more consistent experience with the edibles as the market has, the industry has matured, I've started to lean on them more, which is good for my lung health. So that's been something as I get older that I'm focusing on, is trying to get away from, the smoking and doing more edibles. But it's a hard transition.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, look, we see all these grows that are popping up and they're dumping a tremendous amount of money in trying to create a consistent product. I think from our perspective, without the plant itself being consistent, you'll never have a consistent product, right? If Starbucks uses a different bean or sources a different bean for their Pike's Place from different growers, you can expect a different product. And so we tend to go out and look for best of breed breeders. We performance test their genetics to make sure that they can perform at commercial scale. But what is really important to our growers is consistency. It's cleanliness, it's sterile product, and it's the exact same one every single time. And I think as these brands mature and as these cultivation facilities become more sophisticated, there will be a hyper focus on the same exact cultivar, same genetics without degradation over time.
I just want to add on to that because that is so true. Kim and I are both from New Mexico, and there's a very popular pizza place that's making its way across the states actually called Dion's. And if you know Dion's, you know their ranch. And after COVID, they were having, supply issues. And they changed something. And I called the manager and I was like, I know something's different. And he gaslit me. And he's like, no. And then I found out from someone undercover that I was right. But you do, your clients can change, like they can taste even just the smallest little difference or experience in the product.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think having spent a couple of tours of duty as an operator, you go back 5, 6 years ago, it wasn't quality, was just who could get to market first and how much and how high was your THC, and that was it. But it's the consistency, I think, that really changes everything. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's the most expensive or you have to spend a bunch to get it. It just means you need practices, right? You've heard about the pharmaceutical aspect of it and third-party regulations. But internally, just having your own SOPs that allows you to produce the same product time and time again. And it starts in the garden. That means knowing what you're going to grow and doing everything you can to grow it the same way. So it does yield the same result. I think that's really where quality starts to tell the difference more than anything else.
Absolutely, it starts in the garden. It starts at the intake into your facility. It could even start like when you're picking your genetics, right? So a lot to think about when it comes to quality from the beginning to the end. So that leads us into our next topic here, which is let's talk about the chain's role in ensuring quality. You brought up a little bit about SOPs. Really important to make sure. I think I try to get my clients to sit down at least minimum every quarter, if not monthly, to talk about process and what people, and make sure we're all doing the same thing. If someone's found a better way to do something, make sure that we have an open forum so people have a comfortable space that they can share. Hey, I figured this out. Share it with the team. Figure out maybe that's why we're going to change the process because it's a better way of doing things. But making sure we're all on the same page and we're all doing things consistently, and that even after a few 4 or 5 months, people get really comfortable, and just having those quarterly reminder meetings of why we stay consistent. So let's talk about consistency and what that means for you.
For Zeal, we need to all but guarantee our customers meet regulatory compliance consistently every time. We don't necessarily know what's coming upstream on the processes. Everybody is a little bit different. But I'd like to think of this as we're the gatekeeper to make sure when that product meets the consumer on the shelf, that it's safe every time, and what's on the label, it meets that standard.
So for us, one of the biggest consistency attributes that we're driving in the industry is predictable onset, predictable experience, predictable offset for ingestible cannabis. So a beverage, a gummy, anything that you would put in your mouth, because that historically, as you mentioned, has been a big problem in the industry. So what we have developed is formulations that enable 5 to 15 minute onset every single time, predictable dosing at any dose every single time. We are huge advocates for smart regulation, for testing. We test our inputs, we test our outputs, we test our non-infused ingredients, so everything has to be tested for all food safety aspects, all through the value chain.
I love the phrase smart regulation, because we've seen a lot of silly regulation that costs operators a lot of money. And I think with the maturity of the industry, that is something that, larger companies like yourself are really bringing to light, is smart regulations. Why are we collecting that data? Does it make sense to weigh the manicured waste off of one individual plant? Absolutely not. Okay, I'll pass it.
Great. When I think of consistency, I'd actually change the narrative a little bit and talk about why we see inconsistency in product. I don't know if anyone's read the article that came out late last year, Wall Street Journal put out around the $1 billion threats to the weed business around HIV and disease and pests. And I think part of being able to deliver a consistent, clean product is ensuring that the plants that you're putting into your facility are clean and pest and disease free. And so from our perspective, being able to hit a consistent product is really about having those testing and having that process and protocol in place to ensure you're not bringing outside pests, outside diseases into your plants.
When you talk consistency in this industry, it's a hard conversation because we're forced to grow in regions we might not otherwise grow in, under conditions we might not normally grow in, right? You get your avocados from Mexico for a reason. You get your oranges from Florida for a reason. You don't go to Massachusetts and try to grow oranges, right? You grow apples. Instead, here, if you want that strain that you really like from Humboldt, you've got to figure out a way to grow it over here. And you're not going to grow it outdoors probably down in Florida. You're not going to grow it in a hoop house. So trying to come up with genetics that work is a great first stop, right? It's like, let's make sure we have pure genetics, but then trying to normalize the garden. So from our perspective, consistency, when you think about what you're growing, right? Cocoa is a living medium. You can't produce sterile cocoa that's the same every way. If you want that, go grow in Rockwell. But trying to come up with internal processes that we deliver the same kind of cocoa, same condition, same microbial profile, EC profile, pH profile across the board. Same thing with the nutrients. Make sure you're using the right quality inputs, and when you tear that bag open, it's got the same mixture every single time. It's hard enough to grow in these different environments, and you take the time to find the good genetics, and then you find out you're using inferior products, you're just setting yourself up to fail.
I'd like to add one thing. When you're looking at genetics, it's incredibly important to understand where those genetics came from, right? Because you get one grower who labels genetics one name, another grower may grow the exact opposite plant with the exact same name. So consistency and making sure that whoever you're buying your genetics from runs some kind of background or runs some checks or get it directly from the breeder to ensure it's the exact same genetic every time.
One consistent message that I'm hearing from all of these experts is planning ahead, knowing what you're doing before you start preparing, and then partnering with industry experts who have spent the last decade plus or more out of other industries doing this, saving yourself that pain and that time, investing a little more in the forefront with experts who can lead you in the right direction is gonna maybe save you millions down the road, depending on whatever you're going to see, which we all know this leads to a great segment to I don't know what word I'm trying to say. To the next question, this is a good segue, there's the word, stoners. What are some of the lessons learned that we've seen from people who maybe don't put in that initial investment, that initial thought, right? I have tortoise mentality. Slow and steady wins the race. Let's really know what we're doing before we start to go. So I'll pass it along.
So going back 7, 8 years when we started this industry with this microbial control solution, every customer said, we do not have a problem with our microbials. Then it moved forward a year or two, and they said, that guy across the street has a problem. And then it was, I have a problem, and I need to solve it. The way the industry worked its first 5 years was, or its first 5 years since 2016 was, we're going to, if we do fail, we'll remediate it after it occurs. That has now moved forward to testing. They take care of their problem up front. I learned a very wise lesson from my lawyer, pay for your lawyering up front. It's more expensive if you fail and you have to call the litigator. So the industry has now moved to the front end. And think of it like milk. Most milk in this country is pasteurized before it gets to you. It's known as a kill step. Doesn't sound sexy, doesn't sound nice, sounds a little bit scary. But I would argue to say there's not a single MSO operating today that doesn't use a kill step before they send their product out for testing.
So I'll give a current example where I think a rush to market is having a big impact on quality and consumer experience, and that is in the beverage space, which I am bullish about. I am so excited for the day that I can walk into a wine bar and have my cannabis cocktail next to my friend who's having their Chardonnay. We're not there yet, we'll get there. And in the formulation space, there are solutions for consistent beverages. However, in the current rush to market, just to give we're running a beverage study right now where we pulled almost 50 cannabis beverages off the shelf. Cannabis and hemp beverages, we're testing them, we're doing longitudinal testing, and of the 50, 70% of those are significantly off-label for potency. And over 10% off-label. And they range from 0% potency to over 300% over what their label says. So if we don't get our act together as an industry for product consistency and what we're handing to consumers, we are building our own barriers. Like, we have enough barriers in the regulatory frame. We have to get the quality game right. We have to give consumers products that are predictable and consistent every single time. So I just, I want to use this as a little bit of a yellow flag to ourselves in the industry that we need to self-regulate on product quality to end consumer, particularly in the beverage category, which I think will be the largest category over time for consumables, for non-inhalables.
I'm excited for that day too, where I don't have to feel like I'm like putting my little, dropper of something into my drink, drugging myself at the bar because I don't want to get kicked out.
Oh, stock you up, girlfriend.
Yes, please. Thank you so much. What we're talking about here has to really be, you said it yourself, the least sexy side of cannabis. My job in particular is probably the least sexy side of cannabis. And the reason that I have invested the last decade plus and all of my life and energy into this is because I believe that the more responsible practices that we can convey within the industry, the more power we give the plant. And the more power we give the plant, the more access people have to safe product. And the more access people have to that product, the more work that Mama Cannabis can do in her healing of a nation and the world. And that's what I'm here for. And I think that's what all these experts are really, identifying too here in the work that they're doing. So thank you guys.
Yeah, it's interesting. We work with quite literally hundreds of different growers, and I know this is going to come as a big surprise to most of you, but most cannabis growers are not great at planning. And so what we're having to find is they're pivoting last minute to figure out what they want to do to chase different trends. Part of our goal, part of what we do at Conception is the way we think about budgets is really for every dollar we spend on sales, we spend $2 on R&D, and we spend $3 on customer success. And part of that customer success is helping them with their planning, staying in front of what works for them, what the trends are coming, what will produce well in their grow and what their markets will ultimately want. So I really think it's that consultative approach where you can kind of come in and help them with planning and ensure that they have the product that's going to be available that the market wants that performs well in their infrastructure.
Yeah, I think it's growing with intent, right? I think for a long time it was whatever came out of the garden came out of the garden, and we'll see how it tests. So when you would ask questions, hey, when you planted, what did you think you were going to get? Your yield or what you thought the potency would be? And it would just be, well, I picked this strain and that's it. And then we'd find out on the back end. And what we're seeing now is in order to make the numbers work, in order to make this a real business, you have to know what the ultimate disposition for that flower is going to be. Is it going right to the lab? Is it going to be a pre-roll? What's it going to look like? The holy grail would be able to pre-sell every room you plant and get enough consistent output to know that that's a rock solid sale. I think that's starting to happen more and more now. I've seen more growers talking about understanding and predicting and taking the time to match up the strain with their grow environment and the entire cycle that they're growing. How many weeks will it really be? Stop worrying about the number of turns you have in your room, things like that. Understand what the end product is. It's challenging though, because we don't really know what the consumer wants, right? Price and potency have been out there forever, which is great. I mean, if the alcohol business did that, you would just sell beer to drunk people on a regular basis and just hope you can get the cheapest beer with the highest buzz. So understanding what the consumer wants, and is it being driven by the consumer, or are we driving it based on what we make available to the consumer? I think that's why we're struggling for an identity a little bit as an industry.
I agree. We have an internal phrase at Build My SOP, know before you grow. We work with a lot of operators who, I've got 10 acres and they're just brand new because of our template services. We're great for getting their feet off the ground. And so I'm gonna grow 10 acres. I'm like, for what? For extraction purposes? I have a lot of questions. So identify your buyer first before and make sure we're, getting the genetics they want. That's going to yield the highest profits for ourselves in making these decisions at the forefront. And that might be the decision that means you're in business 3 years down the road or not. Okay, I think we have just about a few minutes left here. Do we want to open up for some questions? Do I hand the microphone off, or do you just want to yell? Just scream. Okay.
I'm actually owned testing lab in New Mexico, and I can corroborate what's been said about the beverages. I've pulled stuff off the shelf just
Yeah, right. Us raising our standards as vendors, I think that's a great point. And saying, we need more consistency. Two, I've taken samples to the labs that I've gotten an 8% back and an 18% back. But then legally, they're allowed a 15% variance at the time that I was doing that, and 15% is a big variance. So I know that yeah, please. Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, I think too, things are moving so fast and scaling so quickly that a lot of these operators don't even know that this is a problem between them and their vendors, because the bud tenders are the ones really interacting with the clients. And sometimes I think that there's a big separation between communication from bud tenders to operations management, which is why I love also sitting people down and talking about process quarterly. And Kim, I know that you've got some things to say to this one, so I'm gonna go ahead and pass it off.
You know, I think vertical integration is problematic, right? Because nobody can be good at everything. And everybody on this panel, we're in very different places in the cannabis value chain. So, and I think testing labs have a place in that. But I would go back to, we need to hold ourselves as an industry to the highest standard for wherever we are in that value chain, right? So I don't ever want to put a product on the shelf with my name on it that hasn't been triple tested, inputs tested, outputs tested. So.
This is where I get to do my Charlie Munger imitation. I have nothing further to add.
You look like something.
I think one other thing, though, is all of us in the industry, whatever area of the industry we're in, we need to collaborate more, even amongst the competition. Like, you think about the labs, a great example. The lack of uniformity in the lab testing makes it that much more difficult. So you don't really know the test you're being asked to ace. And until those things start happening, if we keep leaving this void, like testing is a great example, the FDA will come in and dictate the terms. And I think that's the absolute worst place for all of us to be, because they're not going to be as thoughtful as we can be. So I think we're being given a lot of rope right now, and we have to stop making a noose and start pulling each other out.
Great points. Do we have any other questions? Comments? Until we see changes with 280E, operators are not surviving, and that's an extra, if that cost is not a required cost at this point, ancillary things and things to invest in like that are gonna be really hard for them to have access to. And they make choices. A lot of times I see them spending a lot of money on Band-Aids when they could have just bought the right model at the get-go, right?
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a really interesting point. I've been in the industry for over 8 years now, and we've seen the sophistication of testing really come a long way. But I think in general, it's still fairly unknown, and a lot of it has to do with what you're testing and where you're testing for. When we talk about, right, and so the groups that we see in this space that are testing don't always agree on where to test a plant, when to test a plant. So I still think that the science isn't quite there yet, and the standardization, while it's definitely being talked about in groups like this, it's not quite as sophisticated or at the level where it needs to be, where there's this kind of gold standard.
Which experts like us here on stage are helping to define that gold standard, and experts like yourself.
I was just going to say about testing. I mean, it is expensive. We were in the industry probably 3 or 4 years before we could afford an HPLC, much less a person to get trained up to run, to really do the high-end analytics that we all ought to be doing. So I think it's hard to move product around in regulated markets. So you can't just call your buddy down the street and say, hey, will you test my gummy? Because you can't legally even transfer that product across entities in the seed to sale system. So there are some stupid constraints that really inhibit people doing that internal testing.
As I said, the quality control is really two-sided. There's the internal quality control. Are we improving our standards? Are we making our products better? And yes, you do need internal resources for that. But then you have got your external quality control, your safety compliance, and that's never going to be outsourced. It's a little bit like having a senior in high school card people at the bar. It's they're just not going to let go of that. So you're going to have to, invest in your own internal quality control to raise your game, but you're always going to have to pay the piper for your external quality control.